being a good wife, not at all. Rather, she's more like a slave. My mother-in-law scoffed, her disdain evident as she vehemently denied any praise I received from her friends at the home party she hosted. Instead of acknowledging me as a good wife, she brazenly declared me a slave, then laughed vulgarly. Hosting weekend home parties with her friends was her hobby. While I didn't mind her doing so, the preparation was always my responsibility. Even if I had a high fever, taking a break was out of the question. On this particular day, despite feeling dizzy and unwell, I pushed myself through the preparations and serving duties from the previous day's setup to the actual event. Yet, instead of a single word of gratitude, she publicly labeled me as a slave. Though I had been treated like a servant before, her words cut deeper than ever before, nearly bringing tears to my eyes. It was then that something inside me snapped. A slave. But indeed, that's exactly what this life is like. Even when I confided in my husband, he always sided with my mother-in-law and never listened to my side of the story. Will I spend the rest of my life as a slave for in-laws? No, that's absolutely not an option. To break free from this situation, I pondered what I could do, and as a result, I decided to take action. It's time to play my cards. I devised a plan directed at my mother-in-law and husband. Those two who have oppressed me for so long. For revenge against these two of them, I decided to shed the mask of the obedient wife and enact my revenge. My mother-in-law still looks down on me, laughing. She was unaware of the downward spiral awaiting them. I'm Carol, 45 years old. My husband works for a company that requires him to transfer often, and currently, he's on a solo assignment. Not long after we got married, when it became clear that he would have to leave this town, which is our hometown, due to a job transfer, he told me that I would have to live with his mother. I was surprised by the sudden announcement, but by the time he told me, the decision for us to live together had already been made between him and his mother, and I was merely informed afterwards. It was a late marriage, and I figured such a situation would arise sooner or later, but it came much earlier and more abruptly than expected, and most importantly, my husband was away on his assignment. Living alone with my mother-in-law while my husband was away wasn't something I had anticipated. Both my mother-in-law and my husband hold traditional values strongly, believing that a wife should not earn more than her husband and must devote herself to her husband's family. Ever since we started dating, I naturally ended up doing more for my husband and taking more care of things. It was because I was 5 years older than him, and I didn't feel uncomfortable about it. However, when it came time to get married and I visited my husband's family to formally introduce myself, my mother-in-law quickly lectured me on what it means to be a wife. She spoke about how much she had devoted herself to her deceased husband and his family, leaving me utterly stunned. When I glanced at my husband for help, he coolly told me, "Make sure you listen to her." It was then that I first realized the difference in values between my husband and me. Nevertheless, the marriage discussions moved forward quickly, and feeling that it was my last chance due to my age, I couldn't bring myself to speak up. Though I had concerns about getting along with such a mother-in-law and the difference in values with my husband, I loved him and kept telling myself that we would manage, and so we went ahead and got married as planned. Before marriage, I was a career-driven woman, working at a major bank, and earned a higher salary than most of my peers. My hard work was recognized, and I held a significant position, which I found very fulfilling. Despite my favorable circumstances, I had no choice but to quit my job once we married. My mother-in-law would never allow me to work at a better company and earn more than her son. She pressured me to quit my job, concerned about appearances, saying, "If my daughter-in-law works there, people will think my son can't provide." My husband worked as a salesperson at a small to medium enterprise. Due to the difference in the size of our companies, there was indeed a difference in our salaries. However, I didn't care about that, and I argued that the world today doesn't follow the norms my mother-in-law insisted on. No matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. In desperation, I asked my husband to persuade her. Yet, all he did was sigh and say, "Just listen to what Mom says," without taking my side. I didn't want to quit, but with no support from my husband, I reluctantly had to leave my job. Afterward, I ended up taking a part-time caregiving job as a dependent of my husband. It was also suggested by my mother-in-law. Caregiving is something anyone can do, and it'll be useful when it's time for you to take care of me. Even though I'm not familiar with the caregiving industry, I could imagine how challenging the job could be. Her casual remark made me feel somewhat dismissed, and more than anything, it irked me that she would say such a thing and expect me to work under those circumstances. However, the caregiving sector does have potential for growth, and it's possible to earn qualifications while working, so I thought it might not be too bad and started a part-time job at a nearby care facility. That was when my husband's solo assignment coincided with the news that I had to live with my mother-in-law. I had no say in the matter as a daughter-in-law and had to move out of our apartment to start living with her at her home. Household duties naturally fell to me as the daughter-in-law. For my early rising mother-in-law, I would wake up before 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast. She's picky about food and dislikes simple meals, so only toast was out of the question. Only freshly cooked dishes would do. Breakfast had to include soup and at least 2 side dishes, otherwise, she would scold me for being lazy. After that, it was a rush to finish cleaning and laundry, prepare lunch for her, then head to my part-time job, do the grocery shopping in the evening, and start preparing dinner once I got home. Dinner depended on her mood for the day, requiring me to be ready to cook either a fish or meat dish. While preparing dinner, I had to listen to her constant complaints about my cleaning not being up to par or the menu being too repetitive. After serving dinner and tea, she would start gossiping about the neighbors or nagging at me persistently. I couldn't just ignore her, so I listened to her complaints until she was satisfied and went to her bedroom. Only then could I start cleaning up after dinner. It was the same routine every day. My body was tired, and living under constant criticism from my mother-in-law was a significant stress. However, when she frequently said, "I did you a favor by taking an older woman who can't even have kids as a daughter-in-law," I was left speechless. Perhaps because I married late, my husband and I had trouble having children. When I suggested consulting a clinic, my husband dismissed it as troublesome, and my mother-in-law, having heard about it, worried about public perception if it became known that her daughter-in-law couldn't have children and didn't allow me to go to the clinic. Day after day, I endured their condescending attitudes, feeling indebted for them having taken me in at an older age and blaming myself for our inability to have children. Gradually, I lost any desire to stand up to my mother-in-law or husband. Moreover, he managed his salary himself and was supposed to transfer living expenses to me monthly, but he only put in $300, which was hardly enough. When I asked him for more, he just said, "Cut back and make do with what you earn from your part-time job," and refused to increase it. Although I worked 5 days a week at my part-time job, the workplace was short-staffed, and the work itself was demanding. Moreover, there was gossip and bullying among the supervisors and colleagues, so it was far from being a supportive work environment. Yet, since my husband wouldn't provide enough for our expenses, I couldn't quit and continued to work under immense stress. Together with my mother-in-law's pension and my part-time earnings, we could just about manage, but I had very little money to spend freely. With so little discretionary money, I used any spare time to read books and learn about investing, saving, and budgeting. However, every time she saw this, she would accuse me of getting involved in some shady scam. My mother-in-law is the type who spends money recklessly without considering the future as soon as she gets it. I once explained to her, in today's world, it's important for individuals to invest and save, but she dismissed it, saying, "A woman should just do the housework. Being greedy for money is embarrassing," and walked away without listening. Despite her comments, for me, a former bank employee, investing and saving were also ways to relieve stress, and slowly watching my savings account grow was a small pleasure in my difficult life living with her. I worked exhaustively at my stressful job on weekdays and took care of my mother-in-law at home, listening to her complaints until I was too tired to stay awake. Useless wife. You know, it would be better if you just cheated on him, paid alimony, and left. I'm sure my son could find someone better. Her complaints about me had become like a broken record. Just when I thought I could take it easy on the weekends after surviving such weekdays, it wasn't the case at all. My mother-in-law's hobby was hosting home parties, inviting 5 or 6 friends over every weekend. It's fine if she does it on her own, but of course, all the preparation for those parties falls on me. My mother-in-law insists on serving not store-bought snacks or meals, but properly elaborate homemade ones. So, I have to go shopping early in the morning for drinks and ingredients, and every time, I have to make cookies or cakes from scratch for the party. Even if I'm feeling sick, there's no way I can take a break. Once, when I wasn't feeling well, I asked if it would be okay to buy a cake from a bakery, but that was immediately rejected. It seems my mother-in-law has some sort of pride in entertaining with homemade items. I almost said, then do it yourself, but I couldn't bring myself to argue with my mother-in-law while feeling unwell, so I forced myself to make a cheesecake in the rice cooker. When my mother-in-law's friends gather, I'm just a mere servant, like a maid. One day at a party, one of my mother-in-law's friends said to me, "I'm sorry for always intruding. Your daughter-in-law is really capable," praising me with concern. However, upon hearing that, my mother-in-law replied, "Oh no, she's completely useless as a daughter-in-law. Rather, she's more like a slave," and laughed vulgarly. A slave. But indeed, that's exactly what this life is like. Will I spend the rest of my life as a slave? Hearing her words, I felt despair. There's only one way to escape this situation. Because I had been living a life dominated by my mother-in-law and husband, I had convinced myself that I couldn't live alone. But on that day, for the first time, the idea of divorce crossed my mind. After a while, as I continued to write in my diary, I realized once again that divorce was the only option for me. And then, I thought about telling my husband about the current situation, where I was considering divorce, in order to get him involved. Because if my husband empathized with me and the situation changed, it would be the most peaceful resolution. However, I also realized that it was more likely that things wouldn't go so smoothly. If my husband could change so easily, we wouldn't be in this mess right now. In addition to my diary, I decided to carry a voice recorder with me so that I could submit evidence in case of divorce. After a while, my husband returned home from his assignment. My mother-in-law was clearly delighted to see her son again after a long time. I waited for a chance to be alone with my husband and then brought up the topic of my current painful feelings and the fact that I was considering divorce. Upon hearing the word divorce, I had hoped that my husband would be somewhat shaken and willing to listen. However, he responded with irritation, saying, "It's your fault. I don't want to come back to a house where the relationship between my wife and mother is bad," and stormed off. He then proceeded to blame me, taking at face value the complaints about me that he had heard from his mother. It seemed that she had been gossiping to my husband, painting me as a useless wife who only thinks about shady money matters without doing any housework. I was angry at her for spreading lies, but I was also disappointed in my husband for believing them without question. I realized that I had been foolish to hope that he would trust me. He trusted his mother over me, the person he supposedly loved and married. As my husband unilaterally berated me in shock, he quickly left the room. There was no chance to have a calm conversation with him. Reluctantly, I went to the living room, where my husband had returned and my mother-in-law was enthusiastically preparing dinner. Since she never did any housework, she had no idea where anything was, and her clumsy movements caused things to spill and dishes to break, leaving the kitchen in a terrible mess. "Mother, should I help?" I offered, seeing the dire state of affairs, but that seemed to offend her. "Don't patronize me," she snapped, seemingly incensed by my offer. "You're probably the reason we're in this mess with your sloppy cleaning," trying to shift the blame onto me. Since I'm the only one who ever cooks, isn't it only natural that I organize things where it's convenient for me? Please don't blame me for your mistakes. Having just found out moments ago that she had been lying to my husband, I would usually have backed down silently, but this time, I found myself responding to her with a strong tone. I never expected to retort back at her, and my mother-in-law, taken aback by my unexpected response, looked at me in surprise. However, her expression quickly turned red with anger, and she exploded, pushing me forcefully. As I stumbled backward, she had left a pot of boiling hot stew for dinner. The pot toppled over from the stove, and its scalding contents splattered onto my arm. I screamed in agony at the intense heat. Upon hearing my cry, my husband also came to the kitchen. Despite the situation of the pot toppling over and me writhing in pain nearby, my husband's first concern was for his mother's injury. After confirming her safety, he then angrily yelled at me, saying, "All the effort Mom made for dinner has gone to waste because of you. Isn't it clear that I'm the one who should be worried in this situation?" In shock and pain, unable to find words, she chimed in, "She really is useless, isn't she? Absolutely worthless," joining my husband in berating me. Under the barrage of insults from both of them, emotions I had suppressed until then burst forth as tears. "I can't take it anymore." With that thought in mind, I stood up, shielding my injured arm, rushed out to the living room, grabbed my bag, and fled from my in-laws' house. After walking a bit, I hailed a taxi and went to the emergency room, where I received first aid for my arm. Sitting on a bench in the dimly lit hospital lobby after the treatment, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had married my husband out of love and become part of his family, but they both only saw me as a convenient slave. Witnessing their lack of concern for my injury and their joint berating of me, I couldn't help but realize it. I guess deep down, I had always sort of known, but I guess I was trying not to think about it. My time, my money, my entire life had been exploited by my husband and mother-in-law. Anger surged within me once again as I pondered this realization. Even after this burn on my arm heals completely, it seems like there will be scars left. In that case, I want to use even this burn to punish the two of them. I made up my mind to seek revenge against them. That night, I stayed at a nearby business hotel. I had packed my bag when I left home, including essentials like my wallet and ID, so I didn't have any trouble. The next morning, after receiving treatment at the hospital again, I mustered up the courage to return to my in-laws' house, where my husband and mother-in-law were. They were waiting for me at home, and I was severely berated for leaving the house without permission the previous night. I expected them to be furious. No matter what they said, I didn't resist and appeared to be reflecting obediently. 2 weeks passed since then. I obediently took care of my mother-in-law as before, listened to her orders obediently, and acted as a submissive wife. I allowed my mother-in-law to continue her usual snide remarks, insults, and verbal abuse. My husband returned to his assignment as soon as I got home, but he must have been relieved to hear from my mother-in-law that I was behaving obediently again. However, I secretly took action, pretending to go to work or the hospital while actually going to free legal consultations. Then, on a weekend morning 2 weeks later, still dimly lit in the early hours, I left my in-laws' house with a suitcase packed with my belongings that I had been gradually gathering, abandoning all household chores such as preparing breakfast and my mother-in-law's home party. She would probably be surprised to wake up and find me gone from the house. When I arrived at the business hotel I had chosen as a temporary refuge, I found numerous missed calls from her. She must have contacted my husband as well, as I received several emails from him, some of which, when I checked the contents, were provocative messages like, "There are plenty of younger and more useful wives than you. If you can divorce, go ahead and try." As I was checking his emails, another call came in from my mother-in-law, so I decided to answer the phone. On the other end of the line, she was screaming hysterically about how I had ruined her home party and abandoned my household duties. "This useless wife! Instead of slacking off, just get out of here." To her words, I replied firmly, "Don't worry. I'm already at my new place, and I won't be coming back there." She seemed surprised by my response and let out a flustered voice. She probably never expected me, who had been obedient for so long, to actually leave now. Since making this plan, I had been obediently pretending on the surface while quietly preparing step by step. I kept recording all the verbal abuse and violence at home in my diary, carried a voice recorder with me, and made sure to record audio evidence as well. And the burn on my arm caused by her violence, I got a diagnosis from the clinic and had a medical certificate made. Although I had little money to spare, thanks to saving diligently and investing, I managed to accumulate enough money to live in a business hotel for a while. To my mother-in-law, who was left speechless with surprise, I conveyed my intention to divorce my husband and informed her that I would communicate through a lawyer, then unilaterally hung up the phone. After that, I was able to find a new place to live safely. It was a small apartment, but it was a comfortable room to live in alone. The divorce went smoothly, although my husband and mother-in-law were reluctant to pay alimony. The evidence I had prepared, such as the diary, voice recorder, and the diagnosis of my burn, proved to be strong evidence, and the alimony claim was accepted. It took several months, but the divorce was finalized without any major issues. I was filled with joy at finally being free, after having all my time and money exploited. I felt incredibly liberated at the thought of living without being controlled by anyone. On the other hand, my ex-husband quickly remarried a younger woman after our divorce. I had suspected this might happen, as he had been cheating on me throughout our marriage while away on business trips. The place where my ex-husband worked away from home and my in-laws' house were not that far apart. It wasn't financially or time-wise difficult for him to come back on weekends. Despite that, he rarely came home, and I realized he was cheating when I overheard him talking to someone who sounded like his mistress on the phone during a previous visit. I could have pursued this matter during the divorce proceedings, but I was more eager to be freed from him and mother-in-law quickly, so I chose not to mention it, fearing my husband might object to the divorce if I did. If I could be free, it didn't matter to me whether he cheated or remarried afterwards. When I had settled into my new home and was living alone, I received a phone call from my ex-husband. I was wary of what it could be about, but I couldn't ignore it, thinking it might be something important, so reluctantly, I answered the phone. To my surprise, he sounded quite worn out on the other end of the line. I asked what was wrong, and he told me that his new wife had been using up his savings. His new wife was 15 years younger than him and had a strong personality. It seems like she flatly refused to be taught the mindset of being a wife by my ex-husband and his mother, just as I had been when I first came into the family. Furthermore, she freely squandered his income and savings, neglected household chores, and instead of me, it was now them who were being manipulated and exhausted by her. No matter what they said to her, she adopted a condescending attitude, saying, "I became an old divorced man's wife, so it's only natural." Realizing the situation they were in, he expressed his gratitude for the way I had managed to make ends meet with little money, without complaining, and taking care of household chores and his mother. He pleaded with me, saying, "Let's just forget about that happened before. Please withdraw the alimony and come back." Upon hearing his words, I let out a sigh from the bottom of my heart. His new wife seems to be quite a spendthrift and has some peculiar habits, but I doubt there's anyone in this day and age who would willingly become the ideal wife my ex-husband and his mother envision. Still unaware of such things, it's astonishing that they can say, "Let's just forget about it," regarding the pain I endured. And when I heard the line about being an old divorced man's wife, I couldn't help but laugh. That's just the same as me being constantly told, "I married an older wife," isn't it? It was ironic that my ex-husband is now being told the same thing as he used to say to me, and I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I responded to his plea to come back with a firm there's no obligation for me to do so and hung up, blocking his calls. As for what happened afterward, my ex-husband's mother, who used to treat me like a slave when I was there, ended up being treated like one by his new wife, and she couldn't even hold the beloved home parties anymore. Not only that, rumors spread in the neighborhood that she bullied me into divorce, and it seems like she's grown distant from her friends. She, deprived of her joys, aged rapidly and eventually developed dementia. She was placed in a nursing home by her son's new wife and ended up living apart from her beloved son. While my ex-husband continued his solo assignments, his new wife seemed to be frolicking around with another man during that time. His savings were rapidly dwindling, and he was under pressure to pay me alimony, so his life suddenly became difficult, and he even started working part-time at night. Thinking that maybe his new wife would change if they had a child, he visited a fertility clinic. What he found out there was that the problem lay with him. My ex-husband, who never imagined that he could be the problem, fell into depression and lost his confidence. I wanted to complain about him calling me an infertile wife without any basis, but it seems he has had enough suffering, and his mother is already in a state where she can't hold a conversation. As for me, I utilized the investment and saving knowledge I learned during my marriage to obtain qualifications. I quit my part-time job in caregiving, used those qualifications and my previous work experience to apply for jobs, and to my surprise, my former boss reached out to me and offered me a job at the company I used to work for. And I was hired as a full-time employee once again. Being able to return to the beloved job I thought I could never go back to filled me with surprise and joy, and I'm looking forward to the future with excitement. Though my marriage life was tough and painful, by taking courage and action, I have now found happiness. Having been exploited by my ex-husband and mother-in-law, I'll live for myself from now on. That's the resolution I've made anew.